The 2015 National League Cy Young race is one that we're probably never going to see ever again. You had three pitchers at the height of their powers, all pitching well over 200 innings, and you could have made an argument that any one of these guys probably could have won the Cy Young that year. In a lot of years, they would have. You had Clayton Kershaw, who was the best pitcher in the world at this point, coming off of his MVP season in 2014, and while he didn't quite reach those heights the next year, he did set a career high with 300 punch-outs. But yet you can make the argument he wasn't even the best pitcher on his own team. Zack Greinke had, I'm not going to call it an underappreciated season because it wasn't at the time, but in hindsight, when people talk about the great seasons of recent memory, this one gets overlooked. Zack Greinke is going to be in the Hall of Fame one day, and in terms of run prevention, this was his finest hour, a 1.66 ERA in 2015. He had a 45 2/3 scoreless inning streak that year. I mean, he was masterful, seen for a long time like he was going to run away with the Cy Young. And then a guy from the north side of Chicago decided to put up historically good numbers, and he took home the award that season. That man was Jake Arrieta. When people talk about Jake Arrieta's 2015 season, where they start is kind of with the second half. It's not an exaggeration to say that what Jake Arrieta did post-All-Star break in 2015 is maybe the greatest second half that we've ever seen by a starting pitcher. In that time, he was 12-1 with a 0.75 ERA. On Sunday Night Baseball in late August against the Dodgers in Dodger Stadium, he threw a no-hitter on a night when he was just completely dominant. I mean, that was one of those no-hitters. Not all no-hitters are created equal. That was one of those where, like, by the ninth inning, watch the final inning where he strikes out the side. The guy was throwing wiffle balls. And while Arrieta won a very tight Cy Young race that year, when you look at the run of dominance that Jake Arrieta had, it extends well beyond just that second half. And I would argue you kind of do him a disservice by just talking about that run that he had over those few months in the latter part of the 2015 season. I've been watching baseball consistently for about 20 years now. And when I think of the best pitchers I've ever seen, I think of the ones that you guys probably think of: Verlander, Scherzer, Kershaw, DeGrom. But for this brief period of time, about a calendar year, Jake Arrieta wasn't just the best pitcher I've ever seen. Jake Arrieta was the best pitcher ever. Let's go back in time a little bit here. Jake Arrieta was drafted in the 5th round by the Baltimore Orioles out of TCU in the 2007 draft. Came up as a power right-handed arm, really good fastball, good curveball, and he spent some time in Baltimore, made his major league debut at the age of 24, and his time in Baltimore was subpar, and I'm being generous here. The biggest mark that Jake Arrieta made in terms of baseball history during his time in Baltimore was that he was the starting pitcher at Camden Yards on the night when Josh Hamilton hit 4 home runs against the Baltimore Orioles. Besides that, Arrieta's numbers were poor, and by the time the 2013 season came around, the Orioles were done with him. And that's when the Cubs decided to make a trade that ended up kind of changing the course of their organization. They traded starting pitcher Scott Feldman to the Baltimore Orioles for a package that included Pedro Strop, who ended up becoming one of the Cubs' most consistent relievers over the next several years, and Jake Arrieta, who ended up becoming a National League Cy Young winner. Now, Arrieta showed a little bit of promise in the latter part of the 2013 season, was legitimately good in 2014, especially the second half. Took a no-hitter into the 8th inning in Fenway Park against the Boston Red Sox that summer, and it seemed like, hey, the Cubs might have something with this guy. Now, they signed John Lester in the offseason, but hey, Arrieta can be a solid number 2, number 3 starter for the Cubs, and he was a lot more than that. We talk about the second half, but Arrieta's run of greatness actually started in June of 2015. He threw a complete game shutout on June 21st against the Minnesota Twins at Target Field that season, kicking off what is arguably the greatest calendar year that we've ever seen by a starting pitcher. He wins the Cy Young in 2015. Now, the numbers I'm about to give you don't include the 2 wins that he got in the postseason in 2015, including the complete game shutout that he threw in Pittsburgh against the Pirates in the 1-game wild card that the Cubs were in that season. People wondered if Arrieta would be able to continue the same dominance that he had in 2015, and yeah, it carried over into 2016. Like I said, he threw that no-hitter against the Dodgers in Los Angeles. Well, then he decided in April of 2016 to just throw another one in Cincinnati at Great American Ballpark against the Reds. This was a run that we just hadn't seen before. In 31 regular season starts, that is essentially a full season's worth of work. So from June of 2015 all the way to the end of May in 2016, in 31 starts, Jake Arrieta was 25 His ERA was 1.09. His whip was 0.766. Fewer than 5 hits per 9 innings during that run. He threw 5 complete games, 4 complete game shutouts, and 2 no-hitters. This was essentially the length of a full season in which the guy was completely unhittable. He had a start at the beginning of June, I believe against the Diamondbacks, where he did strike out 12, but he gave up 3 runs against Arizona. And while he ended up having a fine, actually all-star season in 2016, that was the beginning of that marked the end of that historic run of dominance for Arrieta. Now, Arrieta had a few more good seasons. Like I said, he was an all-star in 2016, had an all-right season in 2017, earned himself a solid contract with the Phillies after the 2017 season, had one good year in Philadelphia, then really fell off. Did have some huge moments in the postseason, though, for the Cubs, including going 2-0 in the World Series against the Cleveland Indians when the Cubs finally got over the hump and won their first world title in 108 years. Every great pitcher has a prime. Hall of Fame pitchers have primes that last like 8 to 10 years. You look at a guy like Verlander, he's had multiple primes, right? It's weird how that's worked out. You look at Clayton Kershaw, there was an 8-year run where he just didn't allow runs across the board. But I find Jake Arrieta's run so fascinating because the guy had a fine career. Over 100 wins, sub-4 ERA, like I said, some big moments in the postseason, has a Cy Young, has a world championship ring, great success. But sandwiched in between a lot of just meh is this run where he was completely unstoppable. The only guy in the close to the modern age that we can compare that run to in terms of just innings pitched and overall run prevention is probably that 2-year stretch that Pedro Martinez had in the late 90s and early 2000s. And, you know, Pedro had one hell of a run. You can make an argument those are the 2 most impressive full pitching seasons of relative recent memory. But Pedro Martinez is first ballot Hall of Famer. Jake Arrieta is a fine pitcher who had this run where nobody could hit him. Now, what changed? It was command. There was just this window where his command was perfect, his mechanics were flawless. Even in the World Series against Cleveland in 2016, as good as he was, he went 2-0. You know, there were instances where he was walking guys, giving up hard contact. When he had himself figured out, when he had his body right, watching Jake Arrieta dominate, it was very similar to watching Paul Skeens when he was at LSU. It's like, this guy here is bigger, stronger, and just throws faster than every other pitcher that you're going to ever see. It felt like when he was on the mound, like he was 7 feet tall. I mean, he was just throwing downhill at guys. Some of the filthiest stuff. I mean, 2 seamers at 90 miles per hour. He had a cutter that just died when it got to the plate. Nasty slider. Then he had that 12-6 hook. One of my favorite pitchers ever to watch. And while it was a shortly lived window, I'm making this video to make sure that run is not forgotten. Jake Arrieta, for a period of time, was a god.